The air in the dining room was thick and warm, woven from the smells that were supposed to mean family, to mean gratitude. The heavy, savory scent of a roasting turkey, rich with sage and thyme. The sweet, earthy note of yams baked in maple syrup. The sharp, welcome tang of the cinnamon in the apple pie my Martha used to make from her mother's recipe. Outside the big picture window, the first heavy snowflakes of the season were starting to drift down through the November twilight, promising a long, hard winter. They melted the second they touched the warm glass. Inside, under the glow of the heavy iron chandelier I'd hung myself 40 years ago, balanced on a shaky stepladder, everyone I called my life was gathered. My daughter, Sarah, a permanent worry crease between her eyebrows, was fussing with the napkin of her husband, Tom. Tom was a broker, with soft hands and an easy, condescending smile. He nodded at her, his eyes still glued to his smartphone. My son, Michael, the very picture of the new world. Smartwatch on his wrist tracking his pulse, phone on the table next to his plate, was passionately explaining something to his wife, Linda. She was nodding at him with a kind of breathless adoration, as if every word he spoke was a revelation. Their kids, my grandkids, Jenny and Leo, might as well have been on another planet. Hunched over their tablets, their faces washed in the cold blue light of the screens, the real world of turkey and family was nothing more than a muffled background noise to them. I sat at the head of the table, in the heavy oak chair I'd carved myself in the workshop, that long, lonely winter after Martha passed. It was my throne, my observation post. From this chair, I'd watched them grow up, watched their little legs dangle a foot from the floor, watched them learn to hold a fork. I'd listened to their stories of schoolyard triumphs and first heartbreaks. Once my word from this chair was law. My laugh was the signal for everyone to relax. Now, I felt like a piece of antique furniture, a relic put on display out of a sense of obligation. The argument, as it usually did these days, started with work and bled into money. Michael, whose tech startup did something vague with cloud infrastructure optimization, was waving a fork around, lecturing Tom on the genius of his business model. "You see, old man," he said, talking to Tom but aiming the words at me, "the era of physical labor is over. It's dead. Nobody needs to break their back for 40 years at the same plant just to get a cheap watch and a measly pension. Ideas, flexibility, speed. That's what runs the world now. I can make 100 grand sitting in my home office, in my pajamas with one click of a mouse." Tom, who also worked with numbers instead of his hands, eagerly agreed. "Absolutely. The capital is intangible. Brick and mortar, that's just a liability now. The real assets are intellectual. Brick and mortar." I listened to them, and a bitter taste filled my mouth. I looked at my son's smooth, uncalloused hands, then down at my own, gnarled, the knuckles thick, the nails permanently etched with the ghosts of grease and grime. This house they were sitting in, warm and safe from the coming winter, was built of brick and mortar. With these hands, I remembered the weight of every cinder block, the gritty burn of wet cement on my skin. I did it not because it was an era, but so they could have a goddamn roof over their heads. So Sarah could have a quiet, warm room to read her books in, and Michael could have a flat, green lawn to play on instead of the dusty street. I cleared my throat, not wanting to argue, just to add a single piece of reality to their shiny new world. "An idea's a fine thing," I started, my voice a little raspy, the way it's been ever since years of breathing in sawdust and drywall dust. "But you can't build a house out of an idea. For your business to work, Michael, it needs a server farm. And that server farm sits in a building. And that building, forgive me for saying so, is made of that same brick and mortar. Somebody had to mix the concrete and weld the steel for that." I didn't get to finish. Michael shot a look across the table at me. It wasn't anger. It was pure, distilled annoyance. The look you give a fly that keeps buzzing around your head when you're trying to concentrate. "Dad," he said, his voice flat. "Just be quiet, will you?" 4 words. They weren't yelled. They were dropped onto the table like a dirty dish rag. The silence that followed was deafening. The low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen suddenly sounded like a jet engine. The scrape of a fork on a plate sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Linda suddenly found the half-eaten turkey on her plate utterly fascinating. Sarah seemed to shrink into her sweater, her eyes fixed on the floral pattern of the tablecloth, as if she were trying to memorize it. Tom coughed awkwardly and took a long, deep swig of his wine, looking anywhere but at me. Even the grandkids looked up from their screens, their young animal instincts telling them a line had been crossed. The cozy holiday atmosphere shattered like a pane of glass. I looked slowly around the table, from one face to the next. My family, my blood, and in all their eyes I saw the same thing. Not support, not sympathy. Just a deep, collective embarrassment. They were embarrassed for me, for the old man who didn't understand that his time was over, that his opinions were worthless, that his role was to sit quietly and not interrupt the important people. I, Harrison Harry Miller, a man who'd served his country, who'd built bridges and houses, who'd buried a wife and raised 2 kids on his own, felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I had just been erased, told to shut my mouth in the house, that every nail and 2x4 in it remembered the touch of my hands. With an effort that felt like lifting a boulder, I pushed my oak chair back from the table. The screech of its legs on the hardwood floor was the only sound in the room. "I'm not feeling too good," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady, distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I think I'll head on upstairs." No one said a word to stop me. "No, Dad, stay." "No, Michael, apologize." In their eyes, I saw only one thing: relief. The problem had removed itself. Walking up the stairs, my hand grazed the wall I'd plastered myself. On the landing hung the pictures, a silent history of another life. There was me and Martha, young and laughing in front of the half-finished frame of this house. Me holding a tiny bundled Sarah, looking down at her like she was the most fragile, precious thing in the world. A grinning, gap-toothed Michael, riding high on my shoulders. In all those pictures, I was the center of their universe. The rock, the one who kept them safe. When did I become the ghost? In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed we'd bought for our 10th anniversary. My eyes fell on my old hard hat, sitting on the dresser. My yellow, battle-scarred helmet. I picked it up. The plastic, crisscrossed with 1,000 scratches and paint stains, felt cold and heavy in my hands. I ran a thumb over a deep gouge near the top, a souvenir from a falling brick on a job downtown in '78. "Well, Harry?" I whispered to my own murky reflection in the faded plastic. If I'd known that getting old meant I'd become a ghost at my own Thanksgiving table, I'd have taken all that money, bought myself a damn boat, and sailed off to Florida, instead of breaking my back to build this house. Something inside me didn't just crack, it broke. Clean through, like a load-bearing beam giving way under too much weight for too long. And in its place was a cold, quiet resolve. They want me to be quiet. Fine. I'll be quiet. They think I'm a nobody. Fine. Then my will, my life's work, will be nothing to them. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to make a scene. Men from my time, we don't do that. We act, quietly, and we see it through to the end. The next morning, the house was unnaturally still, filled with the stale, sad smell of a party that's over. The kids had left early, with quick, obligatory hugs at the door. "Take care of yourself, Dad. We'll call next week." I just nodded, looking past them at the tire tracks, their expensive cars left in the fresh snow. Their words were hollow. When the last car was gone, I locked the front door. The click of the deadbolt felt final. I went to the kitchen, poured a mug of coffee so black it looked like crude oil, and drank it standing at the window, staring out at the gray, silent world. I used to hate the silence in this house after Martha was gone. Today, it felt like a relief. In silence, nobody could tell you to shut up. After the coffee, I went to my sanctuary, the garage. It wasn't just a place to park a car. It was my workshop, my fortress. The air in here was real. It smelled of sawdust, gasoline, and old metal, the honest smell of work. On the pegboard walls hung my tools, orderly and clean, each in its place. I went to my old steel workbench and pulled out the bottom drawer. It groaned in protest. Underneath a roll of yellowed blueprints for a warehouse I'd helped build 30 years ago, there it was. A thick, ledger-style book, bound in cracked, dark brown leather. On the cover, in faded gold leaf, it said simply, "Ledger." Martha and I had bought it when we were first married, thinking we'd track our budget. It turned into something else. It became the silent, honest accountant of my life's work. I placed it on the workbench and blew off a layer of dust. I opened it. My own handwriting, changing over the decades from the steady script of a young man to the jagged scrawl of an old one, told the story. October 15, 1985. Sale of 1979 Ford F-150 pickup, $3,200. Applied to Sarah Miller's first semester tuition, State University. Total, $5,000. Remainder, $5,000 remainder, $1,800. Covered by overtime, West End Tower project. I closed my eyes and I could see it. My old Ford. Dark blue, with a white racing stripe down the side. I loved that truck. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a partner. It never let me down. I remember the hollow feeling in my gut when I handed the keys to the young farmer who bought it. That night, I told Martha the engine was going anyway, that it was for the best. I lied. That engine would have outlived me, but seeing Sarah's face, lit up with excitement about her college courses, I told myself it was a good trade, a piece of metal for her future. July 3rd, 1995. Repairs to 1988 Ford Mustang, owner, Michael Miller, post-accident. Parts and labor, $2,150. Funds withdrawn from new roof savings account. I still remember that phone call in the middle of the night, Michael's terrified voice. "Dad, I wrecked the car. I'm okay, but the car..." I got there before the cops did. I saw him, pale and shaking, next to what was left of his first car. The first thing I did was grab him, make sure he was solid, that nothing was broken. "It's just metal, son," I told him. "We can fix metal." A few weeks later, when the autumn rains came, I spent half the night up on the roof with a bucket of tar, patching the leaks myself because the money for the roofers was gone. Page after page, it was the same story. March 20th, 2002. Gift to Sarah and Tom Mitchell for down payment on first home, $20,000. That was the money Martha had left. My emergency fund. I was thinking maybe I'd finally buy that fishing boat I always wanted. But Sarah came to me, crying. The bank wouldn't approve their loan without a bigger down payment. Looking at her, all I could see was the little girl who'd skinned her knee. I walked into the bank the next day and closed the account. "We'll pay you back, Dad, I swear," she'd whispered. She never did. I never asked. The list went on. Little things, big things, covering their utility bills when they were in a tough spot, buying them a new washing machine when Jenny was born. The last entry was from just 3 months ago. August 29th, 2024. Wire transfer to Michael Miller for unexpected business expense. $200. A week later, Linda posted pictures on Facebook of their family vacation in Florida, standing on the deck of a chartered boat. I guess that was the unexpected expense. "I've been quiet for 20 years, I rasped to the empty garage, my rough finger tracing the last entry. "For 20 years, I've been their personal bank, their emergency service, their safety net. And all that time, it seems I swallowed more than I should have." I closed the ledger. The solid thud of the cover hitting the workbench sounded like a judge's gavel. The evidence was all there. My life, measured in dollars and sacrifices, and I realized the betrayal wasn't just that one phrase at the dinner table. It had been happening for years. A quiet, creeping rot. They hadn't just forgotten. They had devalued. They had taken the sum of my life's work and written it down to zero. My hand fell on the heavy framing hammer lying on the bench. The hickory handle fit my palm like it was grown there. This hammer had built things. It had created shelter, but right then I felt like it was time to tear something down, to demolish their expectations. I put the ledger back in the drawer and slid it shut. My decision, made in the hot shame of the night before, was now as cold and as hard as the steel head of that hammer. I was ready to swing. A week passed. Then another. The snow fell, covering the world in a thick, sound-dampening blanket. I found a new rhythm. Coffee. A long walk through the silent, snow-covered streets. Then the workshop. I'd started working on an old grandfather clock that had been my father's. The mechanism was long dead. I took it apart, piece by tiny piece, cleaning away decades of dust and rust. The focused, methodical work kept my mind from spinning. The steady tick-tock I finally managed to coax out of it became the new heartbeat of my house. The phone would ring occasionally, Michael's voice on the answering machine, brisk and cheerful. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. Guess you're out in the shop. Give me a call." Sarah's hurried and guilty. "Hi, Papa. Things are crazy here. Kids have the sniffles. Hope you're good. Talk soon." They were checking the box, performing the duty. They had no idea I was gone. Then one evening, with a blizzard howling outside, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a long, insistent press. The ring of someone who expects the door to be opened. I knew who it was before I opened it. Michael stood on the porch, shaking snow from the shoulders of an expensive wool coat. He was alone. His face was all business. "Dad, we need to have a serious talk," he said, brushing past me into the entryway. He didn't ask to come in, he just entered, like a CEO walking into a branch office. I shut the door and followed him into the living room. I didn't sit down. I stood by the fireplace, my back to the warmth, and waited. "I'm listening, Michael," I said, my voice flat. He paced the room, his eyes scanning everything, assessing. I could practically see the mental calculations as he noted the faded wallpaper, the worn patch on my armchair. "Dad, let's not beat around the bush," he began, using his deal-making tone. "We're both adults. I get that you were a little sensitive at Thanksgiving, but you have to see it from our side. We have to plan for the future." He paused. I said nothing. "Anyway," he continued, a new edge of impatience in his voice. "Sarah and I spoke with a financial advisor. From an estate planning perspective, the smartest move is for you to transfer the deed of the house to us now. 50-50 split. It's just paperwork. It protects the asset, and saves a fortune in inheritance taxes down the line. The asset. You want me to give you the house, I stated. It wasn't a question. Not give, he corrected. Structure. Dad, be realistic. You're 70 years old. What do you need a big house like this for? It's a burden. The taxes, the upkeep. We have kids to think about. This is what's best for the family. My family. In his version of it, I was already just a line item on a balance sheet. And where would I live? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Right here, he said, with a phony salesman's enthusiasm. Nothing would change for you. You'd live in your room, have the run of the place. It'll just be our names on the paper. It's safer for everyone. We'll even draw up a contract, if it makes you feel better, giving you lifelong residency rights. Safer for everyone. It would be safer for them when the old man had nothing left, when the owner became a tenant, powerless, dependent, quiet, exactly how they wanted me. In that instant, the final ember of fatherly affection inside me went cold and dead. I was looking at a stranger, a greedy stranger, who had come to pick my bones clean before I was even dead. A cold rage, sharp and clean as an icicle, rose in my chest. I drew myself up to my full height. Get out, I said. The words were low, but they carried the weight of the entire house. He blinked, stunned. What? Dad, you're not listening. No, son, you're not listening, I cut him off. This is my house. I paid for it with my own sweat. Your mother died in this house. And as long as I am breathing, it is mine. I am not an asset for you to structure. I am your father, though you seem to have forgotten that. I took a step toward him. He instinctively took a step back. So get out and tell your sister the deal is off permanently. Don't you ever come into my house with a proposition like that again. You're crazy. You're a bitter old man, he sputtered from the doorway, his composure gone. You'll regret this. You'll die here alone. Maybe, I said to his back, but I'll die the owner, not a renter. The slam of the front door shook the walls. I heard the squeal of his tires on the icy road as he sped away. I walked to the door and shot the deadbolt. Then I walked to the back door and shot the bolt on that one too. I was in a fortress under siege, and the point of no return was long, long behind me. The morning after Michael's visit, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The rage had burned away, leaving behind a hard, cold purpose. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called Bill O'Connell. Harry? What's wrong? The city trying to condemn that workshop of yours? He answered. Worse, Bill, I said. I need to change my will. Tear the old one up and start over. There was a pause. I see, he said, his voice now serious. What did he do? He offered to let me live in my own house as a tenant for the rest of my life. Jesus Christ, Bill breathed. I'm clearing my schedule. Get down to my office. 11 o'clock. In his office, smelling of old leather and justice, I told him everything. When I was done, he leaned back in his big chair and looked at me. Well, Harry, he said, let's get to work. What's your will? I want them out, Bill. Completely. I want every penny, every brick, every last splinter of this life I built to go to the Fort Henderson Veterans Fund. They help old soldiers who've got nobody left. Let my work go to men who understand what duty means. Bill smiled for the first time. A real smile. Harry, he said, that's the best damn thing I've heard all year. An hour later, it was done. As the notary stamped the final page, a weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted off my shoulders. I was free. But I wasn't finished. I wasn't going to just sit around and wait. I went home and straight to the garage. In the back corner, under a dusty tarp, was my forgotten dream. An old aluminum fishing boat I'd bought cheap 20 years ago. The paint was peeling, the engine seized. "Well, old girl," I said, patting its grimy hull. "Looks like we're both in rough shape. Let's get to work." I worked with a fury. I scraped old paint, sanded down the aluminum until it gleamed, and tore into the frozen engine with penetrating oil and every wrench I owned. My hands were soon covered in grease and grime again, and I was happy. This was real. This was creation. And then I did one more thing. I sat down at my old desk with a pen and a yellow legal pad. I wasn't a writer, but I wrote my story. The story of a simple man, a builder. I didn't use names, I just stated facts. The truck sold for a tuition payment. The money for the new roof that went to a wrecked Mustang. The down payment, that was never a loan. And the final line item. "Dad, just be quiet, will you?" I took it to our local paper, the Evening Herald. The editor, a man named Sam Fitzgerald, who I'd known since he was a kid delivering papers, read it right there in front of me. "Damn, Harry," he said, taking off his glasses. "This is powerful stuff. You sure you want this out there?" "I'm sure, Sam," I said. "Maybe some other kid will read it and think twice." It ran a week later, on the front page. The headline Sam wrote was, "A Father's Monologue After He Was Told to Be Quiet." The story exploded. My phone started ringing off the hook. But it wasn't my children. It was strangers. An old farmer from the next county, whose kids had taken over his land and were trying to move him into a retirement home. The widow of a firefighter, whose son wanted to sell her house out from under her. A retired trucker named Pete, who'd sunk his life savings into his son-in-law's failed business. They called to share their stories, to thank me for giving voice to their pain. I wasn't alone. I was part of a silent, invisible army. Pete the trucker came by. Turns out, he was a hell of a diesel mechanic. He helped me get the boat's old engine humming like a kitten. We'd work for hours in the garage, barely speaking, but understanding everything. I heard about my kids from Bill. They had called him, screaming, threatening to sue me for slander. Bill told me he calmly informed them that every claim in the article could be substantiated by a certain ledger, and that if they continued to harass me, he would be more than happy to share my story with the statewide papers. They went silent. Winter finally broke. I finished the boat. I painted it a deep, defiant blue. On the stern, I stenciled a name, The Unspoken. One sunny April afternoon, a car pulled into my driveway. Then another. It was Michael and Sarah. They got out and stood by the bottom step of my porch, like they couldn't cross some invisible line. They looked tired, defeated. We stood there in silence for a long time. "Dad," Sarah finally said, her voice cracking. "Bill told us about the will." Michael looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw no calculation in his eyes. Just a vast, hollowed-out shame. "We were fools, Dad," he said. "Arrogant, selfish fools. We read your article. We read the comments online from all those other people. We just took. We thought you were a well that would never run dry. We want to ask for your forgiveness," Sarah whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Not for the house, for everything." I listened and felt no victory, only a profound sadness for all the wasted years. I walked down the steps and stood on the same ground as them. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. The hate was too heavy to carry. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, And it doesn't mean going back. I looked them both in the eye. The will stands. That is not negotiable. My life's work will go to men who need it. You are both smart and able-bodied. You will make your own way. It might be the best thing that ever happened to you. I saw the hurt in their faces, but they didn't argue. But, I continued, that doesn't mean you're no longer my children. The door to this house is not locked to you anymore. If you want to, we can try to start over. From scratch. No expectations, no entitlements. We can learn to talk to each other again. On my terms. I held out my hand, not for a hug, for a handshake. Michael took it first. His grip was firm. Then Sarah took it, her hand cold in mine. The next morning, I hitched the unspoken to my old truck and drove it down to the lake. I pushed it into the water, and it floated, perfect and proud. The engine started on the first try with a low, contented rumble. I pointed the bow toward the middle of the lake and opened the throttle. The cool spring wind was on my face. The sun was bright on the water. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I had gotten something back that was worth more than any house, more than any inheritance. I had gotten my voice back. I had reclaimed my life. And that was the only estate that mattered.